Hi, welcome. Enjoy the content, subscribe, and turn on notifications.
Mark has always had a centered personality. Discreet, observant, one of those who prefer to listen before offering an opinion. He met Rachel at a corporate event in Boston, one of those networking gatherings between companies for closing partnerships. She arrived wearing a simple red dress and an easy smile. While many discussed market goals and growth charts, Rachel preferred to talk about travel, literature, and classical music. Mark was intrigued by the contrast between her confident appearance and a certain mystery in her gaze. She spoke with a charming lightness, as if the world around her didn't weigh her down. They exchanged contacts that night, and a week later they were having their first dinner together. The involvement between them happened quickly, but with the illusion of balance. Rachel appeared extremely charismatic, the kind who wins anyone over with just a few words. She had strong opinions, a firm stance, but claimed to be romantic and a dreamer. She told stories from her childhood, talked about her desire to have children, and described in detail how she imagined growing old alongside someone with whom she could share her life. Mark believed every word. 6 months later, they were living together. 2 years after that, they were married. It was one of those marriages that seemed correct, aligned. They had financial stability, bought a comfortable house in a quiet neighborhood, where they planned to see their children grow up. Rachel worked in advertising and was always surrounded by creative people, dynamic projects, and lots of social events. Mark worked as a financial analyst at an investment firm. The two seemed to function as a team. They split the bills, supported each other's goals, traveled on vacations, and spent holidays with their respective families. From the outside, everything seemed perfect. But inside, certain gaps started to appear. Rachel had a constant need for validation. She always wanted to be the center of attention, the highlight of any setting. Mark, in his usual calm manner, let her. He believed that part of love was admiring the other person, letting them shine. But gradually, he noticed that her brilliance seemed to depend on external looks, especially those coming from men. He began to notice small details. Rachel would dress up excessively for meetings with colleagues but wore basic clothes for dinners with him. She said she was too tired for conversations at night but spent hours on calls with friends or coworkers from the agency. Over time, she stopped asking for his opinion on important decisions, responded to comments with sarcasm, and during arguments, made jokes that seemed harmless but carried subtle insults. Mark tried to balance things. He insisted on honest conversations, suggested small changes in their routine, proposed trips, romantic dinners, anything that might reconnect them. Rachel always smiled but gave vague answers. Sometimes she changed the subject, other times she seemed irritated, as if he were demanding too much. One day, he mentioned wanting to have children. Rachel fell silent, smiled as if hearing a joke, and changed the topic. Mark interpreted this as resistance, perhaps fear. But he chose to believe it was just a matter of time. Despite the signs, he clung to hope. He was convinced that every relationship goes through phases and that patience was proof of love. But as the months went by, the distance between them was no longer silent. It was felt in their bodies, in their gazes, in their dry words. Rachel seemed to live in another reality, one where Mark existed only as a social obligation. Still, he persisted. He thought about everything they had built together, the promises exchanged, the person she claimed to be when they first met. The image of that sweet and enchanting woman still lived inside him, even though it was far from the reality he faced. Mark clung to the past like someone holding onto an old photograph, believing it could still be real. He didn't see that time had already changed everything. While he tried to save what was left, Rachel had already turned the page without looking back. The estrangement between them stopped being a silent discomfort and became an open wound, bleeding every day with small actions that said more than any words. Rachel began extending her work hours frequently, always claiming urgent deadlines, impromptu meetings, or last-minute invitations to corporate dinners. Mark tried to believe, tried to trust, but her arguments sounded rehearsed. She no longer explained herself with the same care as before, speaking impatiently, as if justifying herself was a nuisance. During dinners, which now happened less often, she was always distracted. She'd arrive, take off her shoes, grab a glass of wine, and stay glued to her phone. The smile that used to be reserved for him now appeared when she read messages. Mark observed in silence. Sometimes he tried to start a conversation, ask about her day, or make a joke to lighten the mood. Rachel responded with short phrases, changed the subject, pretended to be tired, and retreated early. He resisted the urge to snoop through her phone, to follow her steps, or to confront her without evidence. He chose the path of honesty. One night, while she was preparing something in the kitchen, Mark took a deep breath and said exactly how he felt. That he felt excluded from her life. That he was there, ready to fight, but needed clarity. Rachel turned her face away, crossed her arms, and made a sarcastic comment about meaningless drama. When he mentioned the desire to start a family, to have a child with her, her response was a cold phrase, spoken without emotion, almost like a cut, "That's your problem." Mark stood there, looking at her as if facing a stranger. The woman with whom he had shared dreams now treated his feelings as an inconvenience. Still, he didn't give up. That same week, he spoke with a close couple of friends and asked for a therapist recommendation. He explained that he wanted professional help, that he believed it was still possible to rebuild their connection, to understand what was being lost. He scheduled a session with Dr. Cole Bennett, someone with an excellent reputation, known for working with couples in crisis. On the morning of the appointment, Rachel seemed distant but went along. In the car, the two stayed silent. Mark tried to hide his nervousness, hoping that this conversation with a professional would clear away the hurt. They arrived at the office a few minutes early. The receptionist led them to a small waiting room. The clock ticked 5, then 10 minutes. When the door finally opened, Dr. Bennett himself called them in. Mark stood up with hope. But as soon as they entered the room, everything changed. The therapist greeted them formally, but there was something strange in his gaze. Without warning, Dr. Bennett said that, for ethical reasons, he couldn't conduct the session. He apologized and asked them to leave. Rachel pressed her lips together, crossed her hands in her lap, and tried to hide her surprise. She gave a nervous smile and said it was fine. Mark was confused, not understanding anything. He asked if there was some mistake, but Dr. Bennett simply said he couldn't go into details. On the way home, Rachel commented that she thought all of it was unnecessary. She said it might be a sign that they were forcing something that no longer had a chance. Mark stayed silent. His mind kept going back to Bennett's expression, the hesitation in his words, the way Rachel had acted. Something was wrong. This wasn't just some random mishap. There was something behind the refusal, something no one had said out loud. The following days were colder than usual. Rachel dove deeper into excuses to be absent. Mark, on the other hand, began to look at their relationship from a different angle. It wasn't about saving the marriage anymore. It was about understanding the moment he started living with a woman who was no longer who she claimed to be. The missed therapy session became the silent marker of a truth beginning to unfold before him, even though some pieces of the puzzle were still missing. After that failed appointment, Mark felt consumed by a restlessness he could no longer ignore. The therapist's refusal seemed to have opened a door he had always avoided crossing. It wasn't just the frustration of losing an attempt to save the marriage. It was the way everything happened. The way Rachel masked her surprise. The discomfort in the therapist's eyes when he looked at him. Everything seemed scripted, as if he was the only one who hadn't received the script. The following days were filled with silence, but not a peaceful silence. It was the kind of silence that screams, that suffocates. Mark spent hours thinking about why he was still there. The answers he once sought in Rachel's actions, he now found in her absences. She was physically present but emotionally in another world. Her gaze passed through him without stopping. Conversations, when they happened, were automatic. Sometimes he said something, and she didn't even respond. She just tapped on her phone and muttered, "Uh-huh," without paying attention. He began observing more carefully. The constant messages, the hidden smiles, the tone of voice that changed when she spoke on the phone. He noticed that whenever the name, Cole, came up, whether in a news story, in a movie, or in a memory, Rachel would look away or change the subject too quickly. Mark wasn't the type of man to create theories without reason, but his instinct started speaking louder. Everything he felt seemed to align into a clear pattern. There was someone else. He didn't have proof, but he sensed it. One night, Rachel returned home around 11, claiming her boss had called an emergency meeting. Her hair was tied up in a style she rarely wore, and her makeup was still intact. When she walked in, she glanced at Mark and smiled. A forced smile, the kind offered out of obligation. He watched her for a few seconds before asking if everything was okay. Rachel said yes, grabbed a glass of wine, and said she needed to relax. That night, Mark slept on the couch. He pretended to fall asleep watching TV, but the truth was different. He didn't want to share a room with someone who seemed to carry another name in her thoughts. The next morning, Mark woke up before Rachel. He had a quick coffee, dressed quietly, and left for work as if it were just another ordinary day. But inside, he had already made his decision. He spent the entire day focused, sticking to the plan he had set since waking up. When the day ended, he drove back home and sat in his car for a few minutes, staring at what until then had been his life. He entered the house without making noise, went straight to the bedroom, packed his things, and on the dining table, he left a short letter and the divorce papers. He walked out for the last time without looking back. When Rachel got home later that evening, Mark wasn't there. The living room light was still on, giving the false impression he would return at any moment. But when she looked at the table, she saw the reality staring back at her. The divorce papers, signed by him, rested beside a folded letter with her name handwritten on it. She froze for a few seconds, staring at those documents as if they might disappear. The silence in the house felt heavier than ever. No sound, no movement, no personal explanation. Just her, and the traces of someone who chose to leave with dignity. The messages started in the middle of the night. First, an attempt to understand what had happened. Then came the calls, followed by long voice notes trying to explain, saying he was overreacting. Rachel said he had gone crazy, that all of this was in his head. She even said he was abandoning the marriage because of insecurity. But Mark was already in another city when he heard that. He rented a small apartment in Portland and took on a new project with a company that had offered him an opportunity months ago. In the first few days, he kept his phone turned off. He avoided social media. He avoided anything that connected him to his old life. Gradually, he found pleasure in simple things. A quiet coffee in the morning. Walks without a set schedule. He started sleeping better, eating better, breathing better. As painful as the breakup was, the weight he had carried for years seemed to have stayed attached to the ring that was no longer on his finger. The last time he heard Rachel's voice was in a message left on his voicemail. She cried and said he was destroying everything because of a misunderstanding. That they could start over. That no one knew him like she did. Mark didn't respond. He knew that any word spoken at that moment would drag him back into the chaos he had finally managed to escape. The process moved quickly. Rachel signed the papers a few days later, without objections. Her silence confirmed what he already knew, there was nothing left between them. Mark received the official divorce confirmation via email, accompanied by the administrative chill that contrasted with everything that marriage had once meant. There were no fights, no tears, no promises to reconsider. Just a dry full stop, like ending a contract that had lost its validity. 2 months later, Mark was settled in Portland, with a lighter routine and peace of mind. On a Friday night, he accepted an invitation from an old friend to grab a drink at a discreet bar, far from the places he used to frequent with Rachel. The conversation flowed between laughter and old memories until the friend, without any malice, dropped a sentence that erased the little doubt that remained. "Hey, I remembered you. Last week I went to dinner in Seattle, and guess who I saw leaving a fancy restaurant? Rachel. Holding hands with an elegant guy, light suit, polished demeanor. She looked very comfortable with him, like they'd been together for a while. And here's the funny part, it was that famous therapist, Cole something." Mark froze. The name hit him like a precise arrow, without a sound. The noises around him disappeared for a moment. His earlier laughter died in his throat. His body was still there, but his mind was transported back to that waiting room, to the day of the refusal, to Rachel's forced smile, to the coldness with which she turned her back on everything. As his friend continued talking, Mark leaned back in his chair and looked away. There was nothing left to ask. No detail would change what he now understood clearly. The intuition that once hurt as uncertainty now hurt as confirmation. She had already been involved with the therapist at the time of the appointment. She had already made her choice, she just lacked the courage to admit it. It was in that moment, without drama, without witnesses, that the wound healed. The lump in his throat turned into relief. The truth, as cruel as it was, liberated him. Everything finally made sense. The therapist who was supposed to help them was the same one Rachel hid between the lines of her routine. It wasn't coincidence, nor chance. It was a choice. Cold, calculated, and silent. And even if she never confessed, Mark already had all the answers he needed. Mark left that bar with steady steps but a quiet mind. There were no more questions, no dilemmas. It was as if all the pieces he had tried to fit together for years finally organized themselves on their own. The image of Rachel holding hands with Cole in public dissolved the last shred of hope he might have unknowingly held onto. And instead of anger, he felt relief. He no longer needed to look back expecting explanations. The explanation had already been given, even if in silence. On the way home, he thought about the nights he blamed himself. The moments he thought he demanded too much, that maybe he was failing as a husband. He remembered the days he tried to please, adjust routines, propose solutions. And now he understood that while he was trying to save a marriage, Rachel was already in another relationship. A silent parallel where he was just an obstacle to be maneuvered around. That realization made it clear that the biggest betrayal wasn't the touch of another person but the absence of truth. Rachel moved on before ending what existed between them. And by doing so, she took away his chance to fight with dignity. That night, Mark opened the window of his new apartment, took a deep breath, and watched the street activity. He thought about everything he had lived through with her. Not with nostalgia, but with acceptance. No action could erase the time they shared, the good moments, the plans made sincerely. But the pain of being abandoned inwardly, slowly, taught him more than any conversation. He learned that true love doesn't hide. It doesn't need excuses, long silences, or diverted eyes. Love stays. Love faces. Love respects. And maybe that was what hurt the most, realizing he had loved alone for much longer than he thought. But at the same time, that was what strengthened him. Because loving truly, even without being reciprocated, is never failure. Failure is lying, deceiving, manipulating someone who trusts you. Mark chose to be honest until the end. She chose to pretend until hiding was no longer possible. And as much as it hurt, that difference saved him. Life went on. He reconnected with old friends, started taking better care of his health and mind. He read books that had been sitting on the shelf for years. He met new people, exchanged long conversations, laughed again with lightness. He didn't immediately seek a new love, but he also didn't close the door to it. He understood that starting over doesn't require haste, just courage. And that time heals everything that is true, and destroys everything that is a lie. The last time he heard anything about Rachel, an acquaintance mentioned that she had moved to another city with Cole. They said he had quit his job at the clinic and started seeing private clients. Mark listened and just nodded. It no longer concerned his life. They had chosen their path, and he had chosen his. A clean, calm path, where every step was taken consciously. And even though it had started with pain, that path led him to the only direction that mattered, peace of mind.
Suspicious of your wife or daughter-in-law? Don't go through what we saw in the video. Check the link in the comments and get the ebook with valuable tips and investigator-approved sites to clear your doubts.
Thank you for watching the video. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you won't miss any updates. See you next time.
Hi, welcome. Enjoy the content, subscribe, and turn on notifications.
Lauren Whitaker felt the weight of the silence. The house that once held laughter, arguments over the TV volume, the clatter of pots and pans, and doors slamming now seemed too big for her and Derek. The kids had gone their own ways, with new addresses, jobs, and plans. Lauren tried to be happy for them, but something inside her was slowly emptying. For years, she had dedicated herself to being a mother, taking care of the house, and sustaining the family foundation with small daily gestures. But now, every corner of that house echoed absence. Derek, always so responsible, kept up his work trips. Almost every week he would leave for a different place. He sent short messages, letting her know he had meetings and would return in 2 or 3 days. Sometimes, he forgot to call at night. Lauren understood, after all, it was what he had always done. But what used to be routine now felt like distance. And every message with generic words sounded like a reminder that, at this point in life, she seemed to be second priority. It was on a random Saturday that she decided to sign up as a volunteer at the neighborhood library. She needed to get out of the house, see faces, hear voices, feel useful. At first, she organized shelves, labeled books, and offered help to undecided readers. And, naturally, she started talking to one of the most frequent visitors, Colin Barnes. He was about 15 years younger than her. Always smiling, polite, full of questions about literature and old movies. He seemed genuinely interested in what Lauren had to say. At first, she found it amusing. Then, she began to look forward to the times he usually showed up. It started breaking the monotony of the days. The conversations began extending beyond the library counter. First, a coffee nearby. Then, a short walk to the square. Lauren noticed she laughed more when she was with him. She felt light. There was something in Colin's eyes that reminded her of a version of herself that had been left behind, a version with sparkle, with energy, with a hunger for life. When he lightly touched her hand for the first time while talking about a passage from a book they both loved, Lauren didn't pull away. She pretended to be surprised but let the touch last a little longer than necessary. What started with lingering looks and subtle touches soon turned into private meetings. Colin was enthusiastic, impulsive, full of ideas. Lauren dove into it as if trying to catch her breath after being submerged for a long time. There was guilt. A lot of it. But there was also a hunger to feel desired, remembered, seen. And Colin knew exactly how to feed that. He called her beautiful, complimented her intelligence, said he felt lucky to be with such an experienced and strong woman. Words she hadn't heard in years. She started getting dressed up more. She wore perfume before going out, chose her clothes with more care, styled her hair with attention she hadn't given it in a long time. Derek didn't even notice. He kept coming and going with his rolling suitcase and reports in hand. When he asked how she was doing, it seemed like he was just going through the motions. And in those moments, Lauren felt even more distant from him, closer to Colin. But even in Colin's arms, the weight of betrayal began to creep in. Not because of what she felt for Colin, which was a fleeting desire, but because of the feeling of lying to a man who had built an entire life alongside her. Colin, on the other hand, saw no problem in continuing. He wanted more. He wanted to escape to the coast with her for a weekend, wanted to get to know her more deeply. Lauren avoided it. She said she needed to take it slow, that she wasn't ready for big changes. The truth was that she didn't see a future in it. She was starting to realize that Colin was just a reflection of her loneliness, not a real connection. She was beginning to see that instead of curing her solitude, she had created a new emptiness, even deeper. A hole that mixed pleasure with regret, freedom with fear. Even so, she couldn't stop. Every time she thought about ending things, she found herself wanting one more meeting, one more excuse, one more moment where she could forget reality. An impulse pushed her forward, even when reason screamed at her to turn back. And in this disjointed movement between what she wanted to feel and what she knew was right, Lauren got lost. She thought she was in control. She thought she could stop whenever she wanted. She thought Derek would never find out. She thought. Lauren woke up with a strange feeling that day. She had decided the night before that she would put an end to everything with Colin. She felt drained inside, as if a part of her was slowly being eroded. She realized she had crossed a line she didn't know if she could come back from. And worse, she felt like she was starting to lose control over herself. In her mind, it would only take a conversation with Colin, an apology, and that would be it, everything would go back to normal. She planned every sentence in her head, thought of the exact words, how to soften the blow. But what she didn't know was that while she rehearsed the goodbye, someone had already moved the stage. When Derek came home early from that trip, Lauren felt her body freeze. He appeared at the door with a neutral expression and walked in without saying a word. He left his bag leaning against the corner and went straight to her, who was in the kitchen. She tried to smile, but the gesture faded as soon as she saw his eyes. There was something different there, as if he already knew. And indeed, he did. Without any introduction, he took his phone out of his pocket, unlocked the screen, and held it out to her. Lauren's hand started trembling before she even looked. And when she looked, the ground seemed to give way beneath her feet. The images were there. Short videos, clear photos. Everything. Kisses, touches, whispered words caught on tape. Recorded inside their own house. The details she thought she had controlled, the care she thought she had taken, dissolved in front of the concrete proof of what she had done. Lauren stepped back, her hand covering her face. She tried to say something, but her voice failed her. Derek remained silent for a few more seconds, staring directly at her. When he spoke, his voice was low, firm, and full of weariness. He said he didn't want explanations at that moment. And before she could insist, he turned around and walked out the door without saying where he was going. She stayed there, frozen, trying to understand how everything had fallen apart so quickly. She never imagined he would go that far. It never crossed her mind that Derek, so methodical, so reserved, would take such an action. Installing cameras, staying silent while observing, choosing the exact moment to confront her, it all indicated that he had been dealing with this for some time. And Lauren felt foolish for thinking she could hide anything from this man. It was as if, on some level, he had expected her to stumble. As if he already knew her pain and was simply waiting for confirmation. The following hours were a blur. Lauren sat on the couch and stayed there, in shock. Her phone vibrated from time to time on the table, but she didn't answer. She tried to remember when exactly things started to go off track. She thought about the day she met Colin, the first touch, the first lie. She thought about the times she was with Derek and pretended everything was normal. Now it all came back in flashes, like shards of an explosion she herself had caused. During that night, she couldn't sleep. She walked through the entire house. She opened drawers, looked at old photos, rummaged through Derek's coats hanging in the closet, as if that would calm her down. She remembered the first anniversary they spent together, the trip they took to the countryside when the kids were still young, the time he came home with flowers just because she seemed sad. All those memories now hurt like hot iron. Because they all came accompanied by the certainty that she had set fire to all of it on a whim. 2 days passed. And he didn't come back. Lauren wondered if he was in a hotel, at a friend's house, or maybe driving aimlessly. Every time she heard a car pass by on the street, she ran to the window. She prepared coffee as usual, cleaned the furniture, organized his things as if routine would bring him back. And each time the day ended without a sign of Derek, she sank deeper into a kind of silent despair that crushed her from the inside. On the third day, Lauren called his number and left a voicemail. The first one. She apologized, said she wanted to talk, that she was very sorry, that she knew she deserved all of it, but still needed to speak with him. Then she sent a text message. And another. And another. No response. It was as if he had evaporated. She began to wonder if he would ever come back. She started imagining the worst: divorce, the kids finding out about the affair, the shame of facing her own family. The pain was twofold: losing the man she loved and, at the same time, realizing how much she herself had drifted away from who she used to be. Lauren now understood that it wasn't just Derek who had been betrayed. She had betrayed herself. And realizing that, in the silence of her own home, was like reliving the same blow day after day. Those 3 days felt like weeks. Lauren no longer knew whether it was morning or afternoon, whether she had eaten or just had coffee, whether the sound of the gate was real or a product of her anxiety. Each time she thought she heard footsteps at the entrance, she went to the door and stood there, motionless. And no matter how much she told herself she was prepared, her stomach dropped every time it wasn't Derek. Her heart was constantly on alert, her eyes burned from staring at the phone, waiting for a message that never arrived. She had destroyed the strongest foundation she had, and now she was dealing with the void that remained. Memories of Derek seemed more vivid in his absence. The shared laughs, the silly jokes, the way he adjusted his collar before leaving for work. All of it turned into small cuts that throbbed throughout the day. And the worst part was knowing she had caused it. Not an accident, not something out of her control. She made decisions. Small ones at first, but they became an avalanche. And now she was being swallowed by the consequences. On the afternoon of the 4th day, she heard the key turn in the lock. She froze. For a moment, she thought about running to hug him, telling him she loved him, that she would do anything to rebuild what they had. But something stopped her. Maybe it was the fear of rejection, maybe it was shame. Derek came in and closed the door carefully. He didn't say anything. He walked to the living room and placed his phone on the table. He took off his coat, folded it calmly, and left it on the arm of the sofa. Only then did he look at her. Lauren tried to speak but swallowed her words. She thought he would start with questions, or perhaps a bitter speech. But his silence was sharper than any accusation. They sat facing each other. Time between them seemed suspended. Derek took a few seconds before he started speaking, and when he did, his voice was steady but filled with exhaustion. He said he had spent the last few days thinking about everything. He revisited memories, confronted feelings, and tried to understand where things started to crumble. He confessed that the betrayal had destroyed him in a way he didn't expect. But what hurt the most was realizing that he, for so long, believed he was doing the best for the family by working so hard. And yet, he had unknowingly drifted away. He looked into her eyes and said that he still felt love, that it wasn't possible to erase a lifetime of feelings in just a few days. But he also revealed that something inside him had changed. It was as if a part of him had died when he saw those images. Not just disappointment, but a fracture of identity. A feeling of humiliation, vulnerability, abandonment. He said he felt anger, yes. But what really made him suffer was imagining what might have happened if he hadn't found out. Would he have lived the rest of his life next to someone who lied every day? Was the love he felt truly reciprocated, or just convenient? He asked this without raising his voice, without gesturing, as if he were simply venting something heavy on his soul. Lauren cried silently. She said she couldn't explain what led her to do it. That she felt lost, invisible, insecure. She apologized, said it was never love. That Colin was just an escape, a serious mistake, but still a mistake. She begged for a chance to rebuild, to try to rescue something between them. She said she was willing to go to therapy, change whatever was necessary, give up anything that hindered reconciliation. Derek listened. Every word. He didn't interrupt. He didn't argue. When she finished, he took a deep breath, rubbed his face, and looked at her again. He said he wanted to believe. That for a moment, right there, he imagined what it would be like if he simply forgave her and everything went back to normal. But when he thought about the possibility of sleeping next to her and pretending everything was fine, he felt his chest tighten. He said he would wake up every day with that image in his head. That he would try to hide it, be strong, but slowly die inside. He stood up calmly. He said he needed to leave for a while. That he didn't know where this would lead them, but for now, he needed to go. He said that if he stayed, he would just be postponing the pain. And they deserved more than that. Lauren tried to ask him to stay, but her voice faltered. She watched as he grabbed a small backpack, crossed the door, and left without looking back. She stood there, arms crossed, hugging her own body, as if she could hold together the pieces that still remained. The silence that followed was different. It wasn't empty. It was final. The house had ceased to be a shelter. It was now a mirror of what was left of what she once called life. After Derek left with the backpack on his shoulders, Lauren stayed there, sitting, her eyes fixed on the door he had passed through. There was nothing left to say. What remained was the echo of the last words, reverberating inside her with a force that felt crushing. Days went by. And each day without news from him was like tearing another piece of what was left between them. She tried to keep some dignity. She did the basics. Made coffee, washed the clothes he had forgotten, kept the house in order, as if that would stop the fall. But inside, everything was in ruins. She avoided going out. She avoided her friends. She avoided responding to messages from her oldest daughter, who kept asking what was going on with her parents. Lauren said they were going through a difficult time, that everything would be resolved soon. But she knew it wasn't true. Because even though Derek hadn't spelled it out, she felt it. She felt it in the tone of their last conversation, in the way he looked at her, in the prolonged absence of each passing day. When he reappeared, almost 2 weeks later, it brought no relief. It brought confirmation. He arrived late in the afternoon. He knocked on the door as if the house no longer belonged to him. Lauren opened it with her heart in her throat. Before she could say anything, Derek said he needed to take care of some loose ends. He said he had found a temporary place, a small apartment near work. That he had spoken to a lawyer and already had the papers. She didn't expect it to happen so fast. As much as she was aware of everything she had done, there was a part of her that still believed in the chance of rebuilding. Seeing Derek there, talking about the separation as something concrete, almost bureaucratic, was a blow. She sat down and just listened. He explained that the lawyer was trustworthy, that everything would be done fairly, that she would keep the house and part of the investments. He spoke with respect, with care, but also with a distance that hurt more than any shout. Lauren tried to argue. She said they still had history. That they could seek help. That time might heal that pain. But Derek was firm. He said that, for him, continuing would mean condemning both of them to a lukewarm relationship, sustained by guilt and the attempt to save something that no longer made sense. He wanted to remember her fondly, not bitterly. He preferred to leave while there was still some affection left rather than drag the pain until it turned into disdain. The following days were dedicated to paperwork. Lauren signed the documents as if she were handing over chapters of her own life. Each clause felt like a sentence. Each signature, a full stop. When the process was finalized, she began living a strange, silent, solitary routine. The house was full of memories but empty of presence. No sound of keys turning in the door at night, no suitcase leaning in the corner of the living room, no smell of coffee coming from the kitchen early in the morning. His absence became a character within that house. On a rainy afternoon, while organizing drawers she hadn't touched in years, she found a small box with old letters. They were notes Derek had written for their wedding anniversaries, cards saved from trips, and even messages he left in simpler times, when he went to work and stuck a "be back soon" note on the fridge. At the bottom of the box, there was an envelope without a date. It was yellowed by time. When she opened it, she found a letter that seemed to have been written on an ordinary day but was full of intensity. Derek talked about love, about the fear of losing her, about how she was his point of balance. And there was a specific passage that made her tremble: "If one day you make a mistake, if something between us breaks, I don't know how I'll react. But I promise to remember the woman who walked beside me through the good times and the stormy days." Lauren read that sentence several times. Every word seemed to scream now, as if he had known, years before, that this moment would come. And maybe that was what made her finally understand that their marriage was over. Because the man who wrote that letter was the same one who, in the face of pain, chose not to seek revenge, not to humiliate, not to hurt. He chose to leave with dignity, holding on to what was left of respect. And that choice, more than anything, showed the kind of man she had lost. The separation became official weeks later. The kids were divided, surprised, but respected their parents' silence. Lauren started avoiding questions. She created a simplified version to tell people, a less painful story than the reality. But inside, she knew. She knew she had lost more than a marriage. She lost a partner, a home, and a part of herself. And she knew that regaining that, if it were ever possible, would depend on a long, hard process, perhaps without any guarantee of return. A month after the official separation, Lauren received an unexpected call. It was Derek. He spoke calmly, without formalities. He said he was passing by and asked if he could pick up some old books he had left behind. She agreed. When he arrived, the two looked at each other for a few seconds before any words came out. Lauren handed him the books in silence. But before he left, she gathered the courage to ask if he was okay. Derek said yes. That he was adjusting. That sometimes he woke up in the middle of the night expecting to hear her voice, but it passed. He said he was learning to reorganize himself internally. Lauren said she still thought about him every day. Derek looked at her with calm eyes but filled with memory. He said he thought about her too. But that now they needed to follow different paths. Before turning to leave, he said he didn't hold any resentment. That he had forgiven her. But that forgiveness wasn't a return. It was liberation. And sometimes, the greatest act of love was letting the other person go. And then he left. Lauren closed the door with trembling hands. In that moment, she truly understood what it meant to start over. To start over without certainties, without guarantees, without promises. But with a lesson that would stay with her forever. Because losing someone due to a mistake is painful. But losing them through conscious choices is a burden that isn't carried, it's faced. And she would face it. One day at a time. One silence at a time. One regret at a time. Until life made space for some form of peace. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed the video, don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell so you never miss a new story.